Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Domestic Violence Center of Chester County's January live event. I am Amelia. I am DVCCC's Director of Education Programs, and this is Joe, the coordinator of our Coaching Boys into Men program. Throughout the month, we've shared a lot of information regarding the issue of stalking, as January is National Stalking Awareness Month. Now let's talk a little bit about it. As a major factor in intimate partner violence, stalking is a crime of power. We talk often about power and control as the core of abuse. Stalking is a crime about power. It occurs in a pattern over time, and it often can escalate to very dangerous levels, much like abuse does. Stalking can take many forms, and it causes victims to live in constant fear. 66% of women who've experienced stalking were stalked by current or former intimate or dating partners, and 76% of women murdered by an intimate partner were stalked first. I want to remind everyone that throughout this, if you learn a little bit more about stalking and you fear that you might be experiencing stalking from a current or former intimate partner, you can call our hotline. So that information is going to be running in the ticker below. So let's talk a little bit about You, the Netflix series You. It is based on the book series of the same name from Caroline Kepnes. And it follows our narrator, Joe Goldberg, as he navigates dating in both New York City and later in Los Angeles. However, he is not your average Joe. In seeking affection, Joe Goldberg methodically stalks the women he is romantically interested in before, during, and even after the relationships end, as well as their friends and family members. And things often escalate with Joe to extremely violent levels. So let's try and remember, You is not a romance, it's a thriller. Today, our Joe and I will be talking about intimate partner stalking and how it is portrayed in the series You, as well as some larger questions around our mixed feelings about the character of Joe Goldberg. We want to thank SPARC, the Stalking Prevention and Awareness Resource Center, for developing an in-depth discussion guide for every season of You that you can access in the link we've included. And please remember to join the conversation tonight by dropping a comment or a thought you might have, and we will try and answer you live tonight. So let's dive right in. What do you think, Joe?
Let's do it.
All right. So we shared an article this month on our social media pages from the mental health focused publication Very Well Mind that asked the question, how accurate is the depiction of stalking in Netflix's You? And it presents this concept of 5 different stalker archetypes. And I'm going to put these up for everyone to look at as we talk about them. These 5 different types of stalkers: the incompetent stalker, the intimacy-seeking stalker, the predatory stalker, the rejected stalker, and the resentful stalker. So just going through, the incompetent stalker is someone who wants to establish an intimate relationship with the individual that they're stalking, but they recognize that their affections are not and will not be reciprocated. This type of stalker, unfortunately, does not apply to Joe Goldberg in the Netflix series You. However, this next type, which is intimacy-seeking stalker, the goal of an intimacy-seeking stalker is to enter a romantic relationship with the person that they're stalking. They believe that this person is meant to be with them. This very much applies to Joe. In all 3 seasons of this show, he is almost regularly intimacy-seeking stalking. That's like his core mode. However, we see these other types of stalking behaviors with Joe in the television show. For example, predatory stalking. Predatory stalkers are planning to attack their victims, and they enjoy the sense of power and the act of stalking itself. And we see, I think, with Joe's violent tendencies, his homicides, Going after Benji, or in season 3, going after Ryan. This is a very predatory stalker that we see in those situations. The other thing that we see is the rejected stalker. We do see Joe engage in this behavior because rejected stalkers will stalk their victims in response to the dissolution of the relationship. So the relationship ends and Joe responds to that by continuing the stalking. A lot of times what we see in intimate partner stalking is the stalking is occurring not just before the relationship, but during and after the relationship. So this applies to Joe in all different cases in all these relationships. And finally, the resentful stalker. This is almost like a unique type of stalker because the resentful stalker's goal is to intimidate and frighten someone. They choose their victims really based on a sense of injustice or a grievance that they have with the world. So in this, I think this can apply to Joe in situations like with Peach or with Henderson in season 2, where he stalks individuals because he feels like he's protecting someone. These individuals are doing something wrong or hurtful, and he feels like he's kind of bringing a sense of justice into the world that way. So I thought that was a really unique and cool way to learn a bit more about different archetypes of stalkers and see kind of how does Joe fit those different, roles and those different types. But the next thing that we really want to talk about are the types of stalking behaviors that Joe engages in on the television show that we actually see occur frequently in real life stalking situations. So the first, for example, is something that we would just call classic stalking or following. So classic stalking or following can involve happenstance meetings. So I just happen to show up at a location that you frequent, maybe the gym that you go to or a favorite bar or coffee shop of yours. And I end up, stopping by there and going there to potentially run into you. Maybe I will go out of my way to meet or befriend the victim's friends and family and coworkers or neighbors. So happenstance meetings are a part of classic stalking, is figuring out where the victim's going to be and showing up there. This is something that we see often with Joe in You. For example, the evening that he runs into, and just good thing he was there, Beck at the train station. Other examples, do you have any other examples of this classical?
It's literally his main form of stalking throughout the entire series, let alone the first season. When he shows up to the Dickens event that Beck and Beck goes up to meet her father. Whether it's Beck's or any of the other various individuals, Peach, I cannot remember her name, but the inspo girl, like he just follows them all around. I don't know if he followed Lynn at any point. Lynn was the one of the other friends, but pretty much all of the friends at any given point he was stalking. Classic traditional following. Sometimes he used it in injunction with other methods that we'll mention later to give himself a quote unquote edge in what he's doing. But for the most part, that was his main method of stalking individuals, was in person. From the moment he starts stalking Beth till the end of the series, like that compromises the majority of it. It might be in conjunction with others, but it's for TV, so maybe it makes better TV than him sitting on Facebook the whole time. But it was in his instance and in this story, his primary mode of stalking.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that's why we commonly see now Joe Goldberg portrayed as we had him in our intro video with the hat. He puts on his hat and he's in stalker mode. Exactly. So once Joe has, shown up or frequented at a location and befriends the victim's friends or family, that's when a stalker might start mining them for information. or stalking by proxy, right? Just asking the right questions to get the information that they need from your family, friends, colleagues, anyone close to the victim, without these individuals even realizing the situation. So the friend that you were thinking about before was Annika.
Yes.
And he actually does mine Annika for information about Peach, who he ends up stalking at a point in the show. So I think that that's really interesting, is seeing that mining for information occur in the show. They might even mine for information that they can then use to sabotage others. So he actually does use that information to encourage Annika to sabotage Peach. But stalkers do like to learn and exploit the vulnerabilities of their victims in order to sabotage them or just create issues in their lives. Another one that you brought up, Joe, with the sabotaging is Benji. He learns about Benji's weaknesses and exploits them, gets him to fall into that, resentful stalker trap. And then finally, because we're talking a lot about these classic forms of stalking, and we're talking a lot about friends right now, there's an aspect called target dispersion. And what this is a stalker might also stalk people that are close to their primary victim. So not just stalking the victim, but stalking that person's romantic partners, stalking that person's family, their friends, their colleagues, and others. So we see this with Peach. We see this with Benji. We see this in a lot of cases where Joe engages in that stalking behavior with several people in Beck's life, at least in season 1.
Yeah. Not only does he do it with people, but I mean, well, I guess it's still with the people, but not only stalking, following, targeting them, but gaining access to their he hijacks Peach's computer and things like that. So just every little bit that he can pull in and incorporate, he adds to.
And I love that you brought that up, because it actually transitioned us perfectly into the second form of stalking, which is one that is so common today, so much so that I think people actually just casually use the term stalking when they talk about looking up people on social media. Social media stalking is a very common thing in the world today, but also in the life of Joe Goldberg. So in social media stalking, things that we might see is just using social media as a means to learn as much as you can about your victim. So in that sense, where do they go? Where do they work? What town do they live in? Where are they in these pictures so that I can show up there? Who are their friends that they're hanging out with? Who are the people that I should be meeting and engaging with in their life? So social media gives a ton of information, but also so does, just a simple public record search. So searching, using the internet, this powerful tool to learn more about your victim. And so in this, we talk about using social media to learn about his victims. And Joe earlier touched on the Dickens Festival in season 1, where Joe shows up to the Dickens Festival, is trying to hide from Beck, but she ends up seeing him there. And he even just outwardly admits casually that he social media stalked her there, which isn't even the full truth of how he got there, but but the fact that he says, oh, well, you posted this photo, I saw that restaurant in the background, I looked up the restaurant, I figured out where it was, I figured out that they're having a Dickens festival, and I'm a book salesman, so I had to be here, and makes it seem just so casual and normal. Yet I feel like in real life, and you can tell me what you think, if someone openly said, like, I went to these great lengths and that's how I know you were here, I wanted to come see you, I would not be interested in that.
No, that. I mean, obviously that was like well above and beyond. It reminds me once, an ex and I, we'd broken up. She She posted she was eating at a restaurant that was on my walk to work, and so I literally took the long way to get to work because I didn't want to see her. And I guess you could call that like maybe reverse Facebook
It's
stalking.
the
I don't know,
opposite of
th-
stalking.
but the fact that like social media has gotten to the point where like it's often not weird for us to like know this much information about what another person's up to. You know, if you're dating someone, say you're on Tinder or something like that, you match with someone, you go look at their profile to make sure there's no red flags, and so like where's the line between what is and isn't acceptable? What is stalking? Well, you look at someone's profile once to make sure they have no red flags. I wouldn't call you a stalker, but if you're like checking it daily to see what they're up to, all right, now you're starting to blur some lines and get into weird territory. But we've normalized so much of this to such an extent that, yeah, Joe's response, oh, I went to the 37th, the nth degree to figure out where you are, what you're doing, is definitely weird. But social media stalking in and of itself, we jokingly refer to things that aren't stalking as stalking while ignoring things that are
Exactly.
legitimately stalking. Because, like I
Exactly. And
said,
we've normalized it to a point where it's
yeah,
difficult to discern where is that line crossed. Like, is the line crossed when we take it from social media stalking to real life, where
hmm
I use what I've learned through social media in real life? Or does it cross a line before then? I think one of the things that also occurs a lot with social media stalking is the concept of catfishing. And not in like the classical sense of catfishing where we think of like, I'm
MTV.
MTV catfish, where
Yeah.
I'm trying to start an intimate relationship with you through a fake profile, but rather catfishing you to get more information. Whether I pretend to be a fan, I pretend to be a friend, I pretend to be a neighbor, a classmate, whatever I pretend to be, to get information from you directly, to friend you, to be able to see more about your profile. We see Joe do this actually, with Benji. He catfishes Benji in the first season by posing as an individual who wants to invest in Benji's soda company. And he uses that to get Benji where he needs to be to then attack him.
Yeah.
So social media is a big aspect when it comes to stalking. But there is another thing that goes with social media stalking hand in hand. And that is something that is a little different from social media stalking. It is technological stalking. This picture is from, obviously, the Netflix series You. And the reason I chose this picture is because this is technological stalking. Joe has a phone that is logged in to Beck's cloud. So logging into Beck's cloud account, he has access to everything she sends and receives still without having to look at her phone. He broke into the cloud through her old phone, and uses it to stalk her. So I think that that's a really interesting way of using technology to stalk that people might not think of, hacking into their cloud account. There's a lot of technological stalking that when victim survivors unfortunately bring it up, they often look paranoid, a little bit crazy. And it's very unfair, those kind of views that we put on these individuals, because it's very real. We see a lot at the Domestic Violence Center, individuals installing spyware on your phone so they can not only see what you're doing, but listen to what you're doing, even hack into your camera. GPS on your phone. They might use the GPS on your phone to track literally where you are on a map. There's now even these little square GPS tracking devices that you can easily put, in a bag of your partner's. Put it on their car. We see that one a lot. It's it attached to a car, just personal items, things like that. So GPS tracking is very real. We see that happen in season 2, when Joe uses spyware to track Ellie via GPS on her phone. And then the cameras aspect. So a lot of times, especially in intimate partner stalking and intimate partner violence, we see cameras used. So either installing cameras in the home, outside of the home, to be able to watch your victim, accessing a camera or breaking into someone's camera so that you have access from it from outside of the home. You can do this with like Ring cameras and Nana cams. I know we've seen it on the news where strangers will break into a camera and talk to the children in the house and things like that. This happens a lot during abuse. In You, we don't see the cameras as much, although Joe does have a nanny camera in his apartment in season 2. He also uses the same nanny camera, I believe, to oversee the victims he locks in his glass box in the basement in season 3.
Well, so within the show, in season 1, there's not, aside from him gaining access to her cloud, to Beck's cloud, he doesn't do a whole lot except he steals Peach's computer at one point and hacks into it. Well, he guesses her password. I mean, but still, it's a nefarious use of technology. I mean, and then in season 3, I do not remember the woman's name. The neighbor. She has a wedding ring with a GPS tracker in it. Although it's not used by Joe, it does illustrate a use of technology for finding out more information about people, as well as the neighbor. The man, he basically hacks into all of the CCTV cameras within the area and utilizes facial recognition technology. He does not use it. Well, I mean, he uses it for semi-nefarious purposes because it's a extrajudicial investigation he's conducting, but he's not actually trying to stalk anyone. But it does go to show you what you can do with a little bit of technology. And I mean, it could be as simple as someone finding out or guessing your email password.
Exactly.
Because I could hypothetically log into someone's email, and as long as I don't do anything that is odd, you won't know. Yeah, even Google sets alerts to if someone logs in from a new device. But I mean, I know enough about computers. I don't know how to do it, but I know you can get around it. So
Yeah.
there's all sorts of things like that people can use. I mean, heck, people do it to themselves with your Snap Map or having your
Snap.
location
Yeah.
on. You
Yep.
give people your own GPS coordinates all the time.
Exactly.
If pictures you take, they have geolocation data in them that if you don't scrub, a lot of websites nowadays do scrub them, like before you put it online. So if you post it on Facebook, you can't find the geotag data. But
But for a
not all of
while
them
that
do. And if
that
you
was
share
a
it with a
thing.
friend
Yeah.
or stuff like that, a lot of that information does remain intact. So there's a lot of ways we just tell on ourselves because we don't think anyone's going to stalk us.
No, we
Um,
don't realize
and,
that.
and, and
We have a
yeah.
question actually on the same vein about GPS stalking. So Angela asked, what about parents checking up on their children or their children's friends without them knowing? I will often talk about social media abuse of social media in dating abuse situations with teens. And a lot of times I will talk about, as a teen, your parents will probably look in your phone, read text messages, check in just to make sure if they're worried about you that things are going okay. So I will say to teens, ask yourself with technology, is my partner acting like my partner or my friend? Or is my partner acting like a parent and wanting to, be a little more involved in what I feel comfortable sharing with them? But when it comes to those kinds of things, I think the real key here is without them knowing. If we want to put, family friendly spyware and GPS, technology on our children's devices, I think that it's really important to have those conversations with our children first, and let them know, I'm giving you this device and I want you to know that this device talks to mom's device, and my device can talk to your device. And in that, I can see kind of who you're talking to, where you're going, and I'm doing this for your safety. And then let them ask questions and share their comfort level, and make sure that you acknowledge if they are uncomfortable about certain things and ask why they might be uncomfortable about certain things. If you're having open dialogue with your kids about these things, then yes, I don't think that there's any problem with it. But if you're doing it without them knowing it, I don't think that is healthy. And I think there is kind of a power imbalance going on there. Joe, do you have anything?
As far as parents checking up on their children's friends, that's an extra layer of tricky, because having your own parent, or as a parent telling your children, I'm going to put this family software on your phone, I'm going to whatever. I mean, that's one thing, but then going and looking into their friends, I mean, you want to make sure your children are safe. You, at the same time, you become overbearing. You're almost all but guaranteeing that they're going to do the exact opposite of everything you ask of them, or you're going to just emotional damage up to here, that's going to manifest years later. If they do follow everything you tell them to do, years later they're going to be in therapy up to their eyeballs. I mean, if you are concerned about one of your children's friends, talk to your child, ask to meet them. Um, going, especially if you're doing something digital like stalking your children's friends to make sure they're wholesome, then you're just getting, talk to your kid, talk to your kid. Hey, I want to meet this kid. Say, hey, maybe I want to meet the parents too. That's old fashioned, the way people used to do it, and I get that it seems weird because it's not what's done anymore. Now what's done is looking people up online, but like, that's way less weird. I just want to meet their family. I want to meet who you're hanging out with. I took my niece to the mall uh, about a month ago, like right before the holidays. I mean, malls are almost empty these days, but I took my niece to the mall to meet up with friends. I met
I
all
like
of
the
the
ice
kids.
skating rink. That's something that we'll do with our kids. Drop them off at the free
I
skate.
met all of the kids and
Exactly.
said, yo, shoot me a text in 30 minutes so I know you guys are okay. I have to run to some other stores in the Exton area. Cool. I met the kids. They all seemed pretty nice. I actually ended up meeting the parents when we all came together to pick the kids up. Like, it's not like,
Exactly.
there are very traditional, normal ways to find out if there's something you should be alarmed about.
It all starts with having those conversations as early and as often as you can. Conversations about healthy friends and keeping the lines open and respecting and asking for your children's input and not shooting it down, but letting them know, I value your input. And then your kids are going to want to come talk to you, which is the cool thing. So our next form of stalking that we're going to talk about is breaking and entering, which sometimes teeter-totters on theft, especially in Joe's case. So as we see here in this very scene, Joe is hiding after breaking into Beck's apartment in season 1. She comes home while he's there and ends up turning on the shower while he's hiding in it. And somehow he gets lucky. And his inner narration in this moment, we will touch on a little bit later, but it is a favorite of mine.
I was going to bring it up, but if we're going to do it later, cool.
Yeah, we'll talk about it when we get to that whole topic.
Yeah, cool.
But yeah, so he breaks into Beck's house. Earlier, Joe, you brought up a great point that he slips off places as well and goes into rooms that are maybe off limit at parties. So like he does it at Henderson's house, slips around Henderson's house to get an idea of Henderson in season 2. Season 1, like you said, Peach, getting into her room, going into her computer, looking at her book collection. Of course he would. And then he does this often with the intent to not just learn more, but to perhaps get a creepy little memento that we know that Joe is often apt to pick up. He picks up mementos from his victims. So he steals Ozma of Oz book. He lets Paco borrow it and he returns it. He steals Beck's phone. Doesn't have to do any breaking and entering to do that. He steals panties.
Yeah,
in
he steals Beck's underwear.
Season. He's got a few pairs of underwear over the years. Yeah, he steals a lot of different belongings and he keeps them, as many serial killers tend to do. Yeah. Oh, what a gut punch that scene is.
Yeah.
And then the final thing is, since we talked about Benji's teeth, let's get right into it. Violence and homicide. When stalking escalates to a place of violence and homicide occurs, as we know, 76% of women who were murdered by intimate partners were stalked first. And so in this situation, Beck, Candace, Love, all of these former partners of Joe are unfortunately end up the victim of Joe as well, and as well as their friends and family members in certain cases. You know, when we talk about that, we talk about Benji, we talk about Peach, we talk about 40. We're talking about like very serious individuals. So yeah, this is not something that is unfortunately trying to look for the right word for it. It's not blown out of proportion for sensationalized is the word for television. This happens. Homicide does happen in these situations. And so I think that that's something that we have to get real about for a second. You know, the violence and homicide rates are a lot higher for individuals who have experienced stalking in their intimate partner relationships.
Mm-hmm. And more often than not, these individuals, I mean, it's happened where they do have their own, they might not have a glass or plexiglass container, cell or whatever. I mean, but a bedroom is an effective enough place through the use of coercion, intimidation, etc. Especially when when or if police show up. The door was never locked. I never locked them in there. They could have left at any time, but of course they never left because they were terrified for their lives. So, but of course they're afraid to tell the police that. So it just seems like you know, the significant other who is stuck in the bedroom is just being weird and not coming out, whereas the threat of real life violence is what has kept them locked in. So I'm not going to say that people don't get locked into rooms.
No, they do. What you're talking about is very common, false imprisonment.
Yeah, but false imprisonment without even having to lock a door is very common as well.
And due to those continued patterns of, like you said, of coercion, of gaslighting, and of threats, the threat is real for a victim of violence, whether it just be psychological violence. We know that those things escalate to physical violence time and time again. So that fear is a driving factor that might keep that individual isolated, even like you said, in their own bedroom, in a small space, because they are afraid that if I leave this room, I'm going to be physically hurt. And that is a real fear. So I love what you said, though. It doesn't have to be a creepy glass box in the basement. Absolutely. So let's now talk about Joe Goldberg. We have no.
Yeah.
Not our Joe. We have a lot of thoughts about Joe Goldberg that we want to get into, and we are sure that you all watching at home, if you've seen that you might have a lot of thoughts about Joe as well. Drop them in the comments. We want to feature them. We want to know, what do you think of Joe? We are calling this the problem with Joe. So the first question that we are going to talk about with one another, and we want your answers to this as well, is why do we want to root for Joe? A lot of times in the show, a lot of times watching you find yourself worried that Joe is going to get caught and hopeful that he won't get caught and he'll make it out of these situations. You almost want to root for Joe. Why? What makes us want to root for somebody to get out of a situation that, if he gets caught, will like save someone's life? Especially knowing this is not a healthy individual. So why do we root for Joe? I think there's a lot of things that come in for me. I think part of it is Joe's our narrator. Joe is the only one telling the story, the only one that we are listening to in the story about Joe and Beck, Joe and Love, Joe and whomever it is. So it's a forced perspective. It rarely lets us get out of Joe's head to see the reality. It's that inner monologue constantly playing, almost gaslighting, and how it rationalizes and romanticizes everything that Joe does.
See, from the show opens with Joe's monologue. Bex comes in. He starts talking about just everything she's doing, his thoughts about her, and right from the get-go, I'm like, this man is unsettling. He is unhinged. There is something wrong. I'm not a medical professional. I can't diagnose, but I know something ain't right. And I personally feel like most of his monologues that he gives are just so filled with red flags. It's not, for me, it wasn't his monologues. Anytime he spoke, especially within his own head, I'm like, guys will do anything but go to therapy. Like, they will do anything but go to therapy.
I'm going to rationalize all of my terrible behaviors.
Yeah.
Because I can't fix them.
It's that right after the intro/teaser for episode 1, his first interaction with anyone outside his coworker and outside of Beck is Paco, the little neighbor boy. And throughout the season, between almost every act in each episode, he interacts with either Paco or Paco's stepfather, mom's boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
Who, is painted out to be an alcoholic, a drug user, and an abuser. So we constantly are getting these sort of palate cleansers. Joe does something horrible. And then boom, palate cleanser. He's interacting with this young child and being a really stand-up great dude. And so you're like, it's not even that you were like, Joe's a good guy. You just almost forget that just happened. You're like, I forgot that he just murdered a person and chainsawed them up. And and in the second season, it's I can't remember the young 15-year-old girl,
Ellie,
who lives in his apartment complex. So in season 2, there's that
Ellie.
They have this palate cleanser in between each act in each episode, because personally, for me, when Joe's talking, I'm like, I'm seeing through this crap. Shut up, dude. The only time that I'm really rooting for Joe is when he's about to murder another bad person, but it's like, you're both awful people and cool motive, still murder.
And I think that what's really interesting is it's almost like a Dexter complex. Like, why was Dexter such a popular show? Because the murder feels justified. And that's that resentful stalker thing, right? He feels these are grave injustices, so he stalks and maybe even kills people because he truly believes at the heart of it that he's protecting someone else.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that resentful stalker piece. And I think it's really unique, too, to talk about just the fact that people are multidimensional. Like, it is very realistic that a stalker or an abuser can also do really positive, kind things for other people. We often see this thing, oh, they were such a nice person. I never would have expected them to do something like this. And so I think that that's a really unique piece of it. And it brings me to a conversation that Joe has with Paco. In season 1, he gives Paco Frankenstein to read. And Paco comes back and says, I like that it's told in the monster's point of view. He's bad, but he's not all bad. And you understand why he did what he did. Maybe Dr. Frankenstein really is the bad guy. Mm-hmm. And it's like that same concept of getting in the monster's perspective. And so that's like Paco's literally laying out what's happening in you. I love that this is told in the monster's perspective. It gets you in his head and you hear his rationalizations for these things. And I think that that's also interesting because you and I talked about this before we went live tonight, that you don't ever really get the legitimate perspective of one of his victims. You never get to hear their voice for but half an episode here and there. So we really are forced into this inner monologue of Joe's. And Joe, as we know, romanticizes things way out of proportion. Are you flirting with me? Like, no, not everybody is flirting with you, Joe, you know? So we never get Beck's legitimate perspective. We never get Love's legitimate perspective. And you and I talked about this, Love being like, you only saw what you wanted to see. He didn't even see the real Love. And we didn't get to see the real Love because we were in Joe's head the whole time. So I thought it was really interesting that rewatching season 1, I almost didn't even realize that he had not even had a date with her or another interaction with her at all until they meet again at the subway, between when they meet at the bookshop, because of how much time Joe has spent in his head with us, narrating and focusing on and romanticizing this relationship that hasn't even been formed yet. And then you sit there and you're like, wait, this is their first date? I feel like they've been out on a few dates. And it's like, no, they literally have had one conversation. This is only their second conversation. So I thought that that was really interesting. And the other things are those moments that you get. You get these tiny glimpses into how not normal this is, and how Beck, for example, isn't on the same page as Joe at all. And the same page as us, because we're on the page in Joe's book in this, you know? And so in this, I thought it was really interesting when she would say things like, how did you know I write poetry? And he's like, oh, every writer in New York writes poetry. How did you know my bedroom is that small? Oh, every bedroom in New York City is that small. And so I find those moments to be like a little bit like a snap back into reality. And then Joe starts manipulating you back into kind of being subdued a little bit.
Yeah, and so as I watch, like, that's the thing, is I feel like you had mentioned that, you know, it was a few episodes before Joe even has a date with her, and everything that we know about her and everything we've experienced has only been through his eyes. And you don't the thing is, watching it, that's what I recognize and realize that, but it was I go back to the interactions with Paco and things like that, where I forget that he's being as I'm watching these things, I realize he's being a total creep, but I forget these things, not because of anything Joe says or does in terms of his monologues, but his interactions generally with Paco. The first time we hear Beck's own voice is episode 4. They had just had relations. It finished earlier than anticipated. And so first we hear from Beck, and she's like, what should I say? What should I do? Should I order food? Her phone rings. Someone named the captain is contacting her, saying he's given her $500. She needs to wear the costume that he gave her and come meet her up in Connecticut or somewhere in New England. And we're all led to believe that this is a sugar daddy. That's the first time we hear from her.
And
then the second half of the episode, not even the second half, the second act is the same circumstances from Joe's perspective.
Yes. And the show is not going to give us more because it doesn't want to break us out of that lulled sense of safety that we get in Joe's perspective.
Yeah.
So the show's not going to tell us that it's her dad until Joe knows it's her dad.
At no point when we got her perspective, at no point did she in her internal monologue go, "Oh, my dad's annoying," which would have given the whole thing up right there. It was they forced perspective. We were like, "Oh, Joe is now justified in being a creep and following her to the Charles Dickens fest because he doesn't know what's going on and because she's seeing someone else." And it's like, and once again, it's not even Joe telling you; it's the way the story is framed that forces you into this perspective. Because I think in any reality, someone at least at some point in their internal monologue receiving that kind of text from their father would go, "God, my dad's so annoying," but she never says that, so it's not until later in the episode that it's revealed that it's her father. But yeah, the show's not going to let you know that, because even if they're letting you know Joe's not a great guy, they don't want you to know that he is completely unjustified. Although when you step back and you're like, oh, wow, I was being forced into looking at it this way, you go, yep. Because there's plenty of times where I did not like Joe. There's so many times I didn't like Joe, actually. But when he's facing off against Peach, Beck goes up to Peach's house. Peach gives Beck some drugs, tries to get her into a threesome. She's intoxicated. That's technically rape. She's a bad person. Peach is a bad person. So I'm kind of like, well, Joe's a bad person too. They're fighting over a gun. I kind of wish they both suffer fatal gunshots. But I still wanted all bad people to suffer. And Joe was the
quintessential.
Yeah, he's the extrajudicial force that's going to punish these people. No need for court, no need for right and wrong. I want justice, I want vengeance. And so it's sometimes you just root for him because he is delivering delivering punishment to wrongdoers, even though he's a wrongdoer himself.
Exactly. And I think
Batman's a vigilante.
Right.
He's not a good guy.
The police actually can't stand Batman often.
Yeah.
Like, dude, can you stop? I think the main points here about, and please, if you have thoughts on this, please add them in the comments. We want to know, what do you think? Why do you root for Joe? Why do you want to root for Joe Goldberg? But I think a lot of what we see in this is the aspect that, first, people are multidimensional. People can do really bad things and also do really good things all at once. The dichotomy that is humanity is very real. It's also easy for us to think of stalkers as monsters with no redeeming qualities. And so when we're faced with redeeming qualities about Joe, befriending a child and supporting a child who is in need, going after people for these believed grave injustices, those seem to us like more redeeming qualities. But in reality, stalkers are not monsters. They're usually people that we know in some way, shape, or form, and might even have positive relationships with. And many stalkers and many abusers are actually seen by their community as upstanding, kind, and very successful people. And so a lot of times their negative behaviors, they can easily justify and get away with. And so that's kind of the reality for a lot of stalkers or victims of stalking, is to see kind of the futility in what's happening, because people are just seeing them as good people. And then let's take it one step further. Some people don't just root for Joe. Some people actually romanticize Joe. So knowing what we know, like you've watched You, why are people still attracted to Joe? And I want to share this one last piece here. This is a really funny series of tweets from Penn Badgley, who plays Joe and who has openly discussed that he believes Joe is not a person who just needs somebody to love him, that and this is a direct quote, he's abusive, he's delusional, he's self-obsessed. Penn Badgley, not a fan of Joe, and not a fan of people romanticizing Joe. So as we see here, it's sad, my heart's breaking for Joe. What is it about him? And Penn Badgley says he's a murderer. Okay, but Penn Badgley was sexy as Dan, but Joe is a whole new level. And he says, of problems, right? Because as we know, for those of us who watched Gossip Girl, Dan was not really healthy. Talk about stalkers. Someone says the amount of people romanticizing Penn Badgley's character in You scares me. Penn Badgley responds, ditto. It will be all the motivation I need for season 2. And then in response to that, someone says, it's your face that does it. You are gorgeous. I can see past all the crazy stuff because of your face. And I love this response. And I know our Joe loves this response. He says, no, you're supposed to see past my face to the crazy stuff, the other way around. Don't see past the crazy because of my face. So knowing what we know, why are people still attracted to Joe? I just want to jump off and start this conversation.
Go for it. Do it.
Less about the rom-com piece of it, which we will talk about the socialization a little bit of people, because we had a long conversation about this earlier. But I just want to talk about the Ted Bundy factor, right? Ted Bundy is a prolific serial killer who preyed on women. And Ted Bundy was a normal looking, conventionally attractive man, but very, normal, could blend into a crowd, upstanding community citizen, worked at a crisis hotline, very involved in law school and in a legal career. And so in this, he got away with what he was doing for a long time. I remember a story about his girlfriend at the time, Ted Bundy's girlfriend at the time, saw on the news that we're looking for a guy named Ted who drives a tan Volkswagen Bug. And she went, my Ted drives a tan Volkswagen Bug. That's strange. And she, being, a good person, so I'm going to call just in case, and said to the police officers, I just want you to run a check on my boyfriend, Ted. It could not be him. It could not be him. It's so not who he is. But just to feel better, they ran a check on him. They brought him in and they agreed. What a normal, white, upstanding young man, and let him go for a while. So I find that same complex coming into play with Joe in You. He is a average, conventionally attractive looking man, easily blends into a crowd. And, we even saw Ted Bundy, when it was found, he was charged with several homicides. Women flocked down to Florida, down to that courtroom to cheer for Ted Bundy because they just thought he was the hottest thing. And so there has always been a strange attraction to that kind of unhealthy behavior or danger, or the ability of an average looking white man to get away with a lot more than he should. So that's what I first think about when it comes to those things. But we have a lot of other things to go on. I'd love to hear from you though, Joe.
Yeah, he is very unsuspecting in a lot of ways. He looks like my old roommate. I kid you not. My old roommate was a little bit more balding, but they look bizarrely similar, and I wouldn't think twice about it. Who was it? He didn't have the love that Bundy did, but Richard Ramirez used to walk around in public all the time because he just blended in because he wasn't a giant monster. He was just your average everyday dude. I was saying when I heard about how everyone thought Joe was so gorgeous that I was expecting like Jason Momoa or the dude who played Jacob in Twilight. Like I was expecting some handsome bronze-skinned man, maybe a big buff dude. But Amelia and I talked about it. It's like no, because those people stand out. You see Dwayne the Rock Johnson walking down the street and bludgeon someone to death. You're gonna go, that's a big man who represents physical violence. I suspect he was doing all sorts of horrible things. Yeah.
I think he looked just like Jason Momoa.
yeah. Like, so there is a level of, he's inconspicuous in a certain way, but still,
there's an anonymity to being average.
Yeah. And he's still attractive enough and handsome enough that there's another weird thing that I noticed in I was on TikTok and I think I had mentioned this to you, Amelia, that I'd seen a little while back. It was a fake text conversation, but it was a couple arguing, and the dude was like, go on FaceTime. I want to make sure there's no other guys around where you're at. And all these people in the comments, mostly women, I guess because, heteronormative, all that sort of stuff, and it was a man-woman conversation, but all these women in the comments were like, low key, I find that so attractive, though. That's so hot that he's overprotective. And I'm like, that is weird. That is so weird. Whether there's dudes there or not, doesn't matter if you're
It's
doing
possessive, and it
if you're
is
not
that
cheating. Who
power.
and but people, like, we have normalized, I think, a lot of this stuff. I mean, people it in 2022, ACE, or if you're Christian, the year of our Lord. In 2022, people still think that Romeo and Juliet is romantic. And what's the saying? A 14 and 13-year-old, 3 days. Like, how many people dead? Like, this stuff is not romantic. This is traumatic. This is horrible. This is awful. But we have normalized a lot of this
We
stuff to such a
we
point
will
that
be talking a little bit in February for Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, and you all will be joining me and Joe a lot throughout that month, as primarily our youth outreach coordinating team here, and we're going to talk a lot about that concept of struggle love and why are we normalizing toxic behaviors in love. And I think a little bit of it, or at least a lot of it, comes from socialization of young people through the media, like shows like you. But prior to shows like you, we're going to share a really cool article tomorrow following tonight's live event that shares a bit about the evolution of Joe. The writer of the article believes that Joe is just the natural evolution from a rom-com hero to Joe. And I think it's really interesting because when we think of romantic films, they include these protagonists who are essentially guys like Joe. They will stop at nothing to get the girl, right? They're presented as awkward, funny, sweet, passionate, not scary. But when you think about the behaviors happening in real life, major red flag, really scary. But typically in romantic comedies, the outcome is positive. They get the girl. And the target of the romantic interests, or the target of the stalking in these situations, can range from annoyed to flattered, but they're rarely frightened or concerned. Joe even says in the shower, and this is what we were talking about earlier. He says,
yeah,
I've seen enough romantic comedies to know that guys like me always get out of jams like this. And it's just like, this is just, I think it shows that wonderful piece of the realistic concern that romantic comedies create unhealthy expectations and norms of love and romance and dating. There's so many examples. Let's toss a few out there. Why don't you start, Joe?
What about rom-coms? Because I was just going to throw a real-world example.
Go for it.
Yeah, so there's this whirlwind romance that we've been hearing a lot about recently, much of it against our own wills. And I don't know how true this is, but I apparently recently learned that MGK gave Megan Fox a ring that, if you were to take off, was designed to hurt her. And people are like, that's romantic. That's not romantic. That is abuse. That's abuse. There's nothing. But when it comes to rom-coms, since I don't know too many that well, I think of Something About Mary, where Ben Stiller's character, I can't remember his name, hires a private investigator to follow around his high school crush. Like, just go talk to her, bro. Just go talk to her.
Just to figure out if she's single, where she's living, so that he can then drive many miles to that location to run into her. Exactly. Yeah. And how often do we see romantic leads in these romantic comedies and romance films? How often do we see that happen? This chess play to get me to the right place. It's strategic rather than happenstance. And we talked about those happenstance meetings. In a romantic comedy, those happen all the time, and we're shown that they aren't real. It's that person figuring out, where do I need to go, to be with that person. The other thing here is that I think there's a few that are really good examples of a lot of these things. I know that you are a big fan of Love Actually, Joe. Let's talk about Andrew Lincoln's character in Love Actually.
Dominic Grimes.
But to me, you are so beautiful. And at Christmas, you tell the truth. right?
That's like the worst scene ever.
Andrew Lincoln's character shows up to her house. First off, it's his best friend's fiance. He films her without her knowledge. He strings all of the footage of her alone together into some creepy little video for his own purposes and turns up on her doorstep unannounced to have these cards littered with declarations of secret love. Shh, say it's carolers so my best friend doesn't know. And one of the cards has a picture of a dead woman on it. Like, and people think this is one of the most romantic comedies of all time. You know,
that whole movie, and I don't get it, because every Christmas people are like, it's the greatest love story of all time. And I'm like, really? Is it though?
I can't watch it because I just am left seeking justice for Emma Thompson. So not a fan. Yeah. John Cusack and Say Anything. Joe and I had a conversation before we went on air. Yeah. In your eyes, the light, the heat. Yeah. I'm just going to show up and play a boombox outside of her house, even though she has asked me not to show up, not to contact her any longer. I'm going to hold a boombox up outside of her house for no other reason but to try and win her back. Joe and I talked about personal situations that we had been in our own lives. One of my first relationships, I dated someone for a few weeks in 8th grade. He gave me a phone call, and I answered the phone, and I was just at home hanging out on like a regular Saturday, Sunday afternoon. He says, "Hey, look out of your window." And I look out of my window, and he's standing outside of my house like, "Surprise, I'm here to see you." And it didn't feel romantic. And it really creeped me out. And I broke up with him later that night because it didn't respect my space and my time and schedule. And next time, just let me know that you want to come over and see if I'm feeling it too. Yeah. And so that's that John Cusack is not doing the right thing and Say Anything.
No, and I had said that I had a friend in high school played for the girls rugby team, and there was a dude who was infatuated with her, like 1 or 2 grades below us, I think. He rode his bike like across Westchester to her place, and gave her a picture that he drew of her. And she was just like, first of all, I'm freaked out that you know where I live. Second of all, I'm freaked out that you would take the time to come across town to find me. And third of all, I've already told you 10 times that I'm not interested. He thought it was like the most romantic gesture. Meanwhile, she was thoroughly freaked out that he now took the time. And I mean, the school made it easy because they gave out a little book with everybody's names and addresses in there. But still, it's weird enough that he took the time to do that. I'm not downplaying that part. It's just, the school made it super easy for everyone to know where everyone lived. Directory, that was the word that I was thinking of, because now with the internet, we don't have paper directories anymore. But yeah,
and even from we did a whole series on our TikTok account last February of all these problematic romantic comedies, from Edward Cullen and Twilight, Noah Calhoun in The Notebook, breaking into a girl's house and watching her when she sleeps. Not cute, very creepy. Threatening suicide if a girl won't go out with you. Not cute, very creepy.
Is that Notebooky?
Yes. Yeah. Even Tom Hanks with Meg Ryan, the world's best.
Tom Hanks.
The world's best romantic comedy duo of Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, bringing it back to Sleepless in Seattle days. But in You've Got Mail, Tom Hanks meets her anonymously through a chat. They begin becoming pen pals. In real life, he knows her as well. And he ends up discovering, oh, I'm talking to Meg Ryan's character. But does he tell her in real life, Meg Ryan, it's me, Tom Hanks. No. That's who you're chatting with. No, he continues to chat with her for months to use all the things he's learning to get ahead and toward dating her in real life, rather than just being honest and upfront. Talk about social media and catfishing and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. That's like an ultimate catfish, even before the concept of catfishing. I love this comment. People are attracted to Joe because he's a bad boy. Yeah. Is he though?
That he has a weird moral code where he is convinced that he is doing everything that is right and just. So if people view him as a bad boy, he doesn't view himself as one. He views himself as moral and righteous. I mean,
And I
he
love it too
takes
because
care of Paco.
he really sets himself up too as the perfect boyfriend. Like
Mm-hmm.
he has these adorable dates. He remembers and knows so much about his partner, invests so much time in that. He even thinks of creative things like the everything ship Scrabble cake for
Oh
Beck's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
birthday. Like that's really cute, really nice stuff.
Everything ship and I wolf you and all.
Yes. So could it be that this is a great concept because the victims don't know that he's a bad boy. We as the audience do though know that there's something bad
Mm-hmm.
happening here. And so we're asking the audience, what about him do you all, you know, find attractive? And it is that bad boy quality, but like, when does it cross a line? When does it cross a line until it's not attractive anymore? Is that line murdering you?
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think it's the murder. It time and time again, throughout the series, my support for Joe comes only when when he's pitted in some sort of adversarial thing, like when it's him versus Bex. No, I want her to find out. Like, sure, I wanted him to get out of her apartment before he got caught because it's a thriller and you're hooked and you want to see what happens next. But I never really wanted him to like one up her or like hurt her. But when it's adversarial and it's him versus Peach, it's him versus
Benji.
Benji. Yeah, then I'm like, well, of course, it's him versus the neighbor. Yes, of course, I want him to come out triumphant.
Exactly.
When it's him versus John Stamos. Um, I love John Stamos. I did actually want John Stamos to come out on top of that one, but I think that's just because
That's your love for John Stamos.
that's Uncle Jesse. You can't get the best of Uncle Jesse. Um, but yeah, so for the most part, it's when he's up against wrongdoers, even though he's wrongdoer, I support him. When he's not, I don't. And then in later seasons, I wanted Love to become victorious, and well,
I think that also, especially for, being someone who existed in the world as a single person in their 20s for a long time, it is an appealing fantasy to think that you are just that special, that someone can just in one glance see the goodness inside of you, that
mm-hmm.
someone can be so fascinated by you and choose you out of all the people in the world. That's an appealing fantasy, especially appealing when it's an attractive person, and while you might not find Penn Badgley to be as conventionally attractive as many others do, I do. And I know I know a lot of women though do find Penn Badgley to be a very attractive person. And so having that attractive person then being the one who is making you feel that special and that good and that fascinating and worthy, that can be maybe that's the fantasy. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Maybe that's what it comes down to.
And did you have something else, or
No.
this isn't so much why people are attracted to Joe as much as just like attracted to the whole thing going on, the story and everything else within itself. But it's a big ask for everyone to do. But just take away like the murder and the stalking for like 5 minutes, and you have just what is like a lot of raw emotion, obsession, and it's very adolescent in nature because it's just like a raw passion. Someone sees you for who you are the first time, and how angsty were we as like teenagers and whatnot? Like, no one gets me, mom. You can't tell me what to do.
But like
I'm in
this
love with
person
the
not
girl
only
who lives
they
down the
see
block.
me, they
Yeah,
get
and so
me.
like
Yeah,
I do feel like it invokes because just some like young dumb adolescent type love, like feelings of like what we thought it was supposed to be like it's supposed to be a fire that burns out in 30 seconds and leaves the whole world scorched behind us, and so I'm like I totally see how people are like, even if it isn't Joe himself, it's the feelings of being seen, of being finally understood, and
exactly.
like that resonates with like what a lot of us in our younger years thought love was supposed to be like,
Yes.
versus what we've come to realize is a much more healthy and
and
normal
this
natural
and the
version of love.
socialization of
Yeah,
those expectations of love set up by television and film.
yeah,
And so I think the article that we'll share tomorrow, it's from Stylist, which is a magazine out of the UK. It's a really interesting take, but it says Netflix, you think Joe Goldberg is bad? He's really just the natural evolution of the perfect rom-com boyfriend.
yeah.
Really just taking, because we talked about this earlier, if you were to watch a rom-com that has these problematic behaviors in it and turn off the music in the background, no music at all, or put some sinister music on instead of this romantic music, you're going to get a very different vibe from this individual. You know what I mean? Take out the conventionally attractive lead, right? Take out Ryan Gosling from The Notebook and put in somebody that the audience would not find conventionally attractive. And I don't want to name anybody because I don't want to offend anyone, but like really put someone who is not conventionally attractive in that lead role. And then suddenly those behaviors are not as cute or appealing, right? And I think that plays a big role in it. We even talked about gender identity and how that can play a role. How, individuals like Joe, when they're seen in stalking behaviors in a rom-com, these awkward nerds who are looking into things and showing up places by happenstance in a stalker kind of way. I think it's really unique to think about what that would happen if the script was flipped and if that were a woman doing the stalking behavior. In that we've seen movies like Fatal Attraction. She's not somebody that anybody's gonna look at as, ooh, that's somebody I'm romanticizing, right? Swim Fan, that's a throwback.
You want a throwback? Hand that rocks the cradle. I don't know if anybody remember. I believe it was the babysitter stalking the husband, trying to get the mother out of the picture.
Exactly.
Terrifying. It was the first R movie I ever saw as a child.
See, and then I'm sitting here also thinking of like, I don't know what the movie's called, but I can just quote The Office when he's like, I'm Beyonce, you're Allie Larder. No, I'm Beyonce. I'm Beyonce always. And it's that movie where Beyonce and Allie Larder are, it's Fatal Attraction, but for the early 2000s crowd. And Allie Larder is the stalker in that movie. And it is really creepy. And you don't like her and you don't feel for her and you don't feel for those characters in that way. Even in, something like Swim Fan, it's not two women competing over a man, the bad woman, the good woman. In Swim Fan, it's really just a girl who's really, really into a guy and is crossing all of the lines the way that Joe does. But if we were to put Joe in the world of a romantic comedy, he would look a lot better than if we put, a
Oh
girl
yeah,
in
just
that position.
put some
I mean,
goofy musical cues behind Joe, and suddenly it's far less nefarious. Just
yeah. And I
he
know
just
that
broke into her apartment and stole her goods.
you empathize with Love, the character
Yeah,
Love. But what I find really interesting, just speaking on that same point, is that as soon as Joe finds out who Love really is, a lot like him, he's immediately disgusted by her and doesn't want anything to
yeah.
do with her. And it's like, so you can be that way and it's
hmm
rational. and it's love. But when a woman is that way, it's wrong. And I find that to be a really interesting just takeaway. So I want to just put this up again for everybody because we have gone through our questions for tonight's webinar and the things that we wanted to touch on and talk about. But we'd love for you to share your thoughts. So if you're still here with us and you have something to say about intimate partner stalking, about Netflix You, about Joe and why are people rooting for Joe or attracted to Joe, pop it in the chat now and we will put it up here and talk about it with you. But we really want to thank everyone who tuned in and joined us and shared a little bit, asked questions, gave some answers, because we both really enjoyed watching and then rewatching you again. And rewatching again to take notes. We really enjoyed this because it helped us to do the practice of critically watching our media sources and being able to not let ourselves get caught up in the socialized responses that we might have typically had. Like I could say, I could find myself rooting for Joe.
Yeah.
Easily. And it's like, I don't want to. I hate that Joe makes me root for him. Why does this happen? Like,
well, I was gonna say, watch it. I text you. I was like, I know better. And there were so many times that I was cheering for him, and it was all circumstantial because, like,
you were like, I hate this.
Yeah, I'm like, I hate this guy, but right now I want him to take care of Benji.
Right.
And it's just like picking my lesser of two evils, which
Absolutely.
I think is another reason why I liked Love, because I was like, well, I want Love to take down Joe. Is she exactly good? No, but
I think that one thing we got from Love in season 3 was one of the best quotes about relationships and abuse in relationships. And she says, you know, or is it from love to Marion or Marion to love? I'm looking it up. It was Marion to love. Listen to me. Maybe it's not my place. Maybe you think you owe it to your kid. Maybe you're clinging to when things worked. But please, if there is ever even for a fleeting moment, a tiny voice in your head, and that tiny voice is saying, I deserve better, listen to her. That is your partner. That is your real true love. And if you betray her long enough, you will lose her. And I just think that's so poignant and beautiful, and speaks a lot to the work that we do here at the Domestic Violence Center. So it's just one more reminder for any of you who might have learned something new about intimate partner stalking tonight and modes of stalking, and might be worried that they are experiencing stalking from a current or former intimate partner. Please feel free to call our 24-hour anonymous hotline. The number is below, but it is 1-888-711-6270. And someone is always here. It might even be Joe or I answering the phone. This Joe, not that Joe.
Yeah.
All right, Joe, I want to thank you for joining us tonight for our live.
Pleasure all mine. Many, many thanks.
I appreciate it. All right, everyone, have a wonderful night. And if you haven't watched You, spoiler alert, little late, enjoy it. Check it out. We'd love to see any comments later after our live stream to see what you thought and what you felt. All right. Have a great night.